Cactus 1549, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
New York, January 17th, 2009. High up in the skies, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 is making a desperate attempt to return to LaGuardia International Airport, its departure point. This plane has just lost both of its engines after striking in full force a flock of geese shortly after takeoff. Outside the cockpit, the pilot's view is filled with the large birds, while the passengers and crew hear very loud bangs and see flames from the engines, followed by an eerie silence. Both their engines had just shut down. With every passing minute, they're losing altitude, and they have to land, now. The lives of 155 people on board now depend on what the pilots do in the next few minutes. Were they able to avoid a tragedy on January 17th in New York? Let's find out. This is the story of U.S. Airways Flight 1549. It's a beautiful afternoon in New York City at the LaGuardia International Airport. The skies are clear and the weather is quite friendly. The time is approaching 3 p.m., and U.S. Airways Flight 1549 and its 150 passengers and 5 crew members are planning to take off by 3:26 for a 1 hour and 32-minute flight to Charlotte Douglas International Airport, North Carolina. The Charlotte Douglas International Airport is located about 6 miles to the west of North Carolina's Central Business District. It was founded in 1935 and was originally named the Charlotte Municipal Airport. It's the main airport for commercial and military use in the Charlotte metropolitan area and covers 5,558 acres of land. After making a stop in North Carolina, this flight was scheduled to continue on to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The plane for today's flight is an Airbus A320-214. It's powered by 2 turbofan engines and accommodates 2 pilots and up to 4 crew members. It's suitable for mid-range and short distances, just like this flight. The pilot in charge of the flight was the vastly experienced Captain Chelsea Sully Sullenberger. He was a 57-year-old former fighter pilot serving as an airline pilot after leaving the U.S. Air Force back in 1980. He was also a glider pilot with expertise in aviation safety. At the time of Flight 1549, he had completed 19,633 flight hours, with 4,765 of those hours coming from an A320. With him in the cockpit was First Officer Jeffrey Skiles. Age 49, Jeffrey Skiles had completed 15,643 career flight hours, including 37 in an A320. As soon as all 150 members of the flight completed the boarding process, Captain Chelsea Sullenberger was cleared for takeoff at exactly 3:24 p.m. All passengers are sitting pretty relaxed in preparation for what they suppose is a short trip. With co-pilot Jeffrey Skiles in control, the flight crew made its first report exactly a minute after being airborne at 700 feet and climbing. The weather looks clear to both pilots, with a minor broken visibility cloud at 3,700 feet and a quite mild wind. At 3:26 and 4,200 feet and still climbing, Captain Sully is visibly amazed by the view of the Hudson River from above the Bronx, with Manhattan in the diagonal center and New Jersey far off in the distance. He says to Skiles, "What a view of the Hudson today." Fast forward to a minute just after taking in the remarkable view. Flight 1549 strikes a flock of Canadian geese at exactly 3:27 and about 4.5 miles northwest of its departure point. The Canadian goose is a large type, often wild, with a notable black head and neck, white cheeks, white under its chin, and a dominant brown body. This bird is native to the temperate and Arctic regions of North America and is occasionally seen during migration across the Atlantic in northern Europe. The Canadian goose is often found on or close to fresh water, with extreme adaptation qualities to live in human-altered areas. This is why it was around the Hudson River where Flight 1549 struck a flock of it. Now let's get back to our story. Immediately after the incident, the pilot's view is filled with the large birds. The crew and passengers can hear several loud bangs. Others can see flames from the plane's engine, which is followed by silence and a strong odor of fuel. Almost immediately, the plane goes into a state of frenzy and commotion. Passengers are worried for their lives. Crew members are trying to calm them down. Realizing that both engines are on the verge of shutting down, Captain Chelsea Sullenberger takes control of the gearing while Jeffrey Skiles starts working on the checklist for a possible engine restart. At this point, the panic is getting to an all-time high, and the aircraft continues to climb for another 19 seconds, attaining a height of about 3,060 feet at an airspeed of around 213 miles per hour before beginning a gliding descent, accelerating to 240 miles per hour as it descended through 1,650 feet. At exactly 3:27 and 33 seconds, Captain Sully picks up the radio and places a mayday call to New York Terminal Radar Approach Control. This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia. The tension gets the better of Captain Sully as he wrongly mentions the call sign, which was supposed to be Cactus 1549. Patrick Harton, the air traffic controller on duty, takes on the mayday call and instructs LaGuardia's tower to suspend all departures before directing Captain Sully back to the runway. Sully responds, unable. Then asks the controller for other landing options in New Jersey, mentioning the Teterboro Airport, which was then granted. Captain Sully initially responds by saying yes, but then he says, "We can't do it. We're going to be in the Hudson." As the aircraft reaches less than 900 feet above the George Washington Bridge, Captain Sully orders his crew over the cabin address system to brace for impact, and the flight attendants relayed the message to the already troubled passengers. In the meantime, air traffic controllers tell the Coast Guard to help caution all vehicles in the Hudson River and ask them to prepare to assist with the rescue. 90 seconds later, at 3:31, Captain Sully makes an unpowered ditching, descending in a south direction at 140 miles per hour into the middle of the North River section of the Hudson Tidal Estuary. An unpowered ditching is a type of forced landing when a plane loses all of its propulsive power and is forced to land. As the plane lands with one impact, no bounce, and a gradual deceleration, several passengers scream, clinging on to several things and praying for their lives. The ebb tide then began to take the plane southward. Captain Sullenberger, already dealing with a lot, opened the cockpit door and gave an evacuation order. At this point, the passengers were losing their minds, some already crying, others clamoring for an escape. The flight crew started evacuating the passengers through the overwing emergency window exits onto an enlargeable slide raft that was deployed by a crew member from the front right passenger door. A crew member had initially attempted to use the front left side, but it failed to operate, so the manual inflation handle was pulled. As the evacuation process continued, a passenger from the flight made a terrible decision to open the left rear door, allowing more water into the plane. This, and the fact that water was also entering the plane through a hole in the fuselage and from opened cargo doors, presented the crew members with an even more difficult challenge of evacuating all passengers in time. As the water level within the plane rose, the attendant urged all passengers to go forward by climbing over their seats, while others proceeded outside. One passenger in a wheelchair had to be carried. Finally, Captain Sullenberger walked the entire cabin twice to ensure it was empty. The weather outside the plane was very chilly, with air and water temperatures at 19 degrees Fahrenheit and 42 degrees Fahrenheit respectively. Most of the evacuated passengers waited for rescue knee-deep in water on the partially submerged slides, with a few of them wearing issued life vests. For fear of a possible explosion, other passengers stood on the plane's wings and some swam away from the evacuation. A particularly brave passenger, who helped the flight crew with evacuation, found the wings so crowded he jumped into the river and swam to a rescue boat. Fast forward a few minutes, and 2 New York waterway ferries arrived. Captain Sullenberger then asked the ferry's crew to first rescue passengers on the wings because they were more in jeopardy than those on the slides, which detached to become life rafts. The ferries began taking a few passengers aboard using a Jason's cradle. A Jason's cradle is a maritime rescue device that's similar to a scramble net made with cloth webbing. It's usually suspended over a rail, but it also has stiffener bats that make it easier to climb. Several other passengers were rescued with boats from the U.S. Coast Guard. The last person was taken from the plane at 3:55, marking 30 minutes from when the flight took off from LaGuardia International Airport. After the successful evacuation, most passengers were taken to the Weehawken side of the river, where about 140 New York City firefighters, police, and helicopters responded to provide medical help to the passengers. The assessment showed that passengers and crew members sustained 95 minor and 5 serious injuries, including a deep cut in the leg of one flight attendant. A total of 78 people got medical treatment, mainly for minor injuries and hypothermia, while 24 passengers and 2 rescuers were treated at hospitals, with 2 passengers kept overnight. With the stakes so high, and having not flown together before, Captain Sully and Jeffrey Skiles succeeded in averting a potential plane crash and saving the lives of 150 passengers. The move from Captain Sully to decide against landing on the Teterboro Airport runway or returning to LaGuardia Airport would end up being crucial. Flight simulations later showed that while Flight 1549 could have successfully returned to LaGuardia had it turned towards it immediately after striking the flock of birds, the scenario didn't account for real-life considerations, concluding that ditching the plane provided the best survival probability, considering the circumstances. It was later discovered during an investigation that 2 days before the accident, the plane was experiencing a compressor stall in its right engine, but the engine restarted and the flight was completed. The compressor stall was also discovered to be caused by a faulty compressor sensor. However, it was replaced and verified that the engine wasn't damaged in the incident. The Flight 1549 incident was solely due to a natural cause, the flock of Canadian geese it struck.